It was a long day for sure, but it was incredible. And the conversations that we had with people afterwards, whether it was about the record, the favorite song, what they thought about the documentary, or even just like the pop-up shop experience, you can't get that in the digital realm.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. This is episode 240. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. Ed is not with me today, but I'm very excited. We're not flying this episode solo because I have a very special guest with us here to talk about a topic that I think is really, really interesting and something that we don't often get into on the show, and that's planning epic in-person portions of your releases. And with me to talk about that is none other than Mr. Cavaliere from the Wonder Years to talk about the release extravaganza that they just had for their new record. It happened 2 weeks ago. Casey, welcome back to the show, dude. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course, Jack. Wow. Big and knowledgeable shoes to fill with Ed being gone, but I'll do my best.
He's going to be listening back to this one with scrutiny.
I know, Ed, if you're listening to this,
picking apart every word.
I tried my best. There is no replacement. I don't want to pretend to be that here, but I am happy to join Creative Juice always. You guys know that. So yeah, and this is, like you mentioned, I think going to be a fun one. It's very fresh in my mind as when we're taping this, our new record, The Hum Goes On Forever, has just come out 2 weeks ago, and we did do a pretty, extravagant release weekend event that took place locally in our Philly suburb of Doylestown. So yeah, no better place to unpack that than on this show, I think. And there was a lot that came with it and a lot that went into it for sure.
Yeah, I was super excited to talk about this because when you guys announced the weekend long party, I was like, man, that is such. I think I might have even commented on one of the Instagram posts, have been like, this is a badass offer. And I've talked about this on the show before, but I think you guys are known for kind of pulling off stunts like this from time to time. So I was super excited to talk about it. Just to start us off, let's run it down. What is it? What did you guys do? For people who aren't familiar, what did the release weekend for Hum look like? What did you guys plan? How did it all go?
Right. Well, like we mentioned, yes, we are no strangers to. I won't call them stunts, but you could maybe classify them in that way. I was just talking with a friend about an album release event that we did in years past, where it was effectively 4 shows in 24 hours, where we did Philly, New York, Chicago, and LA. Wow, that was a marathon for sure. But it was interesting and it was cool. And I think, something like that sets the stage for how can we do something that really puts us in front of our community and in front of people that have been with the band and that have supported the band for a while, and make something that's special, right? And so in that case, it was all smaller rooms, and we tried to touch down in each part of, kind of like a Midwest show in Chicago, East Coast, Philly, New York, and then try to get to the West Coast because yes, we have been an East Coast band, and a lot of the time they don't get the early in-person love, right? Right. But not always. We have done record release in stores and done flyouts and stuff like that. And I think that's a big part of it. Obviously, the label always loves in stores and things like that because they still deal in physical product. And it is a way to make an offer for a special, whether it's a signed copy or something else in that vein, along with, an acoustic performance, right? That's a thing that it has been done before, certainly. And we do it in our own Wonder Years way. And we try to, bake in a little extra bit of whether it's storytelling or just showing up and being there and making it feel like a celebration of the album that they've been waiting for and that we've been waiting to kind of give them, right? And so this time around with The Hum Goes On Forever, I guess the best way to set the stage for the thought process behind this was to talk about what in Creative Juice speak here, what assets we knew we were going to have that we wanted to roll out with the release that were going to be
Oh
special.
man, you're speaking the language. For
I know,
sure.
I know.
You
I'm
prepared
going,
for this, dude.
I'm going all in, and there's probably like some Wonder Years fan. If they're listening to this, then I think it's a safe space. But there's probably some just like, oh, he's getting so industry on me. It's like, well,
If you're listening to this podcast, you know we're very anti-industry.
right. So that's why I say it's okay. And if somehow you're digesting a clip from this later, there is context to this. And as you will see, it's less about the businessiness of it and more about trying to make a really special moment and a way to thank people for engaging with us, supporting us, and ultimately, in a climate like the industry that we exist in 2022, to actually come out and participate in something in person, which is increasingly difficult. I mean, the pandemic obviously supercharged and multiplied the challenges around that, clearly, and we're still feeling effects from that. But in general, even the way music is being consumed and digested and even valued, the one thing that I think you have a chance at always of making a real memorable impact is doing something that requires people to come out and participate face to face, and being able to deliver something that's extra special in that case, if those people have been motivated to do so and take that kind of action, right? And, there are certain moments in bands' careers where they have opportunities where, there's a fever pitch of excitement and you can try to build to a moment like that. And clearly an album release is one of those. And we knew that this is a record that obviously had a very interesting backstory and history, being written and put together in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of so much uncertainty, and how that came in and met, in classic Wonder Years fashion, met the uncertainty and challenges of life where we are at as people, and specifically for my singer Dan, lyrically, that's where the record was. So it kind of felt like the most fitting way to celebrate, coming out on the other side of all that uncertainty with this record was to really make sure we took it on ourselves to do something that was in person and that was special, and clearly our hometown and or like a Philadelphia suburb that we grew up in and played a lot of shows. That was kind of the nexus where our attention focused, because we knew that we had a couple of things that we wanted to put together. And the first of which was something that we knew we would have to coincide with the release of the album, because we had set out to begin making that the second we started downbeating and writing the record, which we said, hey, we are writing a record like we have never written a record before, because of all the restrictions of the pandemic and everything that has come along with that. And so we said, hey, we really want to make a calculated choice to be able to show people what this is like and what it's like for a Wonder Years record to come together. Sure, people have seen YouTube videos and other stuff that we'll post on socials over the years, videos in the studio, photos, things like that. But we wanted to do something that felt a little bit more detailed, dug a little deeper,
intentional.
Yeah, and was a little bit more robust in scope, because we felt like, hey, we're not even sure how this is going to end, but if and when we come out the other side, we know that there's going to be a story about the record making itself that we want to be able to share with fans as well. And we knew that it would have been a long time since our previous album, Sister Cities, was released. And so we enlisted the help of some local friends and said, hey, are you able to be here? And we would like to have a camera rolling pretty much 24/7 at these points. When we write, start the first time we all get together for an extended period of time, for an entire week, we rented out a farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. And we said, hey, it's going to be just the band. We're going to quarantine. We're going to do the NBA bubble thing, but we want to add one more person to that. And it happened to be our friend Brad Wollner, who works for a company called Catalog Co. and does great work, and said, hey, we're comfortable with you. We want you to be here and just get everything and show it and capture it. And then we want to move through that into downbeating. We did some of these songs with a producer in Philadelphia by the name of Will Yip, and some with a producer that we've had a long shout out to Will, that we've had a long history with, Mr. Steve Evitz. And it was interesting because even when we started this documentary, we didn't know that both groups of those songs would end up on the same release. And that's part of the story as well. And so there's a whole lot to it. And we knew that the first thing at hand was that we wanted to debut that and wanted to roll that out. And it would eventually come to be sewed into an hour-long documentary about the whole origin of the record and what it was like for us as people, and how, how we were living our lives, how the things that were coinciding with my singer having his first and then second child during all of this. And it was a really special thing and special opportunity for us to be able to present that kind of behind the scenes look all in one sitting, so to speak. And this was a thing too, where we wanted to say, hey, instead of just posting it up as like short form videos, reels, whatever, what if we said the weekend the record comes out, we build that into an exclusive in-person premiere. And so we knew that there had to be some sort of theater component to where we wanted to put together this experience. And that's where initially our attention turned to the small suburb of Doylestown right outside Philadelphia. We've played shows there, a lot of it's not far from the VFWs that we played and came up in the Philly suburbs many years ago. So it felt like a home to us. And they have a really quaint little downtown area where there is a county theater right across the street from one of the biggest record stores in the area that has been there, right? Called Siren Records. And we've done in-stores there. We've done things with them. So we thought, well, there's a way that we can, work. They're literally across the street. Actually, you can, if you're on the stage that they put up, you can see behind, the band or the artist that's playing. You can actually see the movie theater marquee through the glass. So it's very easy, and in that way, we're like, well, that's cool. Okay, so we just need to figure out how to make that happen, rent out a theater and have them do the exclusive premiere. But we were like, well, the problem with this is Siren Records can only hold like 150. I feel like there's going to be maybe a little bit more demand. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Turns out there was a lot more demand. And so we ended up having sessions and curating it. And so the idea here was that you would come, join us. We would play an acoustic in-store set, celebrate that the record was out, play some of the new songs, and then immediately after that, everybody would walk safely across the street, not jaywalking, for liability purposes, and
put that into contracts,
and go be the first ones to see this documentary in full about the making of a record that literally that day or the previous day they had just been able to see, and those would be the first ones, and to get something special like that, to get that behind the scenes things. Actually, as we talk right now, it's still not available online. So those are actually the only people that were able to come out to this event and be in one of those sessions and one of those groups, are the only people that have seen it all the way through, which is really special and a way to kind of thank and even like reward people for all the support and that, and I mean, people flew in from all over the country, actually, as it turned out, which was really neat too. And the precursor to all of this, and we have done things like this as well, was that we wanted to do, as you are no strangers to on this show, something limited, something collectible, and a way for us to kind of do a small batch of collaborative items that coincided with the record and were very record centric, and offer them up in a pop-up shop form. And we found a spot that had a very large space for us to rent, roughly 100 feet down the street from the record store. So
everything's kind of fallen into place here.
Right. So we did that, and we came in 9 a.m., sweeping, throwing rugs down, moving furniture around, cleaning the place up, and popping the whole thing up in a matter of hours and setting everything up, kind of curating it. We did limited edition like embroidered bucket hats, Carhartt hoodies, a number of exclusive kind of, t-shirt designs, printed on some really nice stuff.
This was all exclusive merch that could only be bought at this pop-up event.
Right. That you can only get if you come to Doylestown that day and look for it. And a lot of it, it goes really quick. And we try to do our best to make sure that nobody's coming in and like, I want like 25 of these shirts. And honestly, what you find is, I think, luckily enough, are the community of people that are this into what we do. And when we do things like this, it almost kind of polices itself. Everybody is like, nah, I don't want to do that because I want somebody else that's, in the back of this line to be able to get a shot at it. Right. And a lot of people obviously are like, hey, my friend can't come. He had to work. He's gutted. So for that reason, we didn't try to cap anything, but there's no way to really gauge how much and how quick the demand with something like that's going to be. But it is a really exclusive and memorable way for someone to have a commemorative piece of clothing. Or we even did with a local barbershop company, a friend of ours that runs a spot called Sheer Revival. They do a lot of hair care products. And so we actually had Zach West come in and pop up and do cuts in the corner of the shop.
That's awesome.
And we did a collab candle, a collab sea salt spray with Sheer Revival that was specifically record themed. And that was really cool too. And those all went. So, and it was just, in person, just there for the day kind of thing. And it was great. It was awesome to see people line up, to see people look at it, digest it, really appreciate it, but also to show up in town and make an entire day out of it. This pop-up shop opened up at 4 p.m. and the first in-store session started at 6. And so in that window, it was funny. You didn't realize the impact that it would have, but the Starbucks across the street closed down early because they're like, there's such an influx of people. We're out of everything. So we're just closing.
You guys closed down Starbucks.
I guess.
Wow.
Well, we didn't. The Greater Wonder Years community that showed up did, I guess. It was neat to see, but it was even more powerful to see how it all kind of led and flowed into a, step 1, step 2, like move here, do the in-store, then walk across the street. And then to top it all off, we did an after party at a outdoor patio space that we were able to rent out at a restaurant that was actually right behind where the pop-up shop was. So all this stuff is literally within 400 yards of each other. And after the last screening of the documentary, we had a patio where we had an exclusive custom album themed beer that we had partnered up with a local brewer to create. The Haze Goes On Forever. So we were serving that and just open patio space, and everybody could it was honestly really neat to be hanging around and also see and give people a way to see them having just digested the day overall, but then also the documentary about it. And it was a really neat thing. We even poked in to watch a few minutes of the last screening. And that was an interesting thing, being in the movie theater, watching yourself, which I don't think any of us are, would ever, envision a reason that would have ever happened. But then also seeing people really appreciate the things about making the record that we've come to, think are pretty standard or commonplace, that they don't get a chance to see, which is, us as a band and as people existing in our day job and what it looks like to track something in the studio or live together, eat a meal together at a table, and then go downstairs and try to write in the basement of a farmhouse, So it was really neat. And that was pretty much the flow of the entire day. It was a long day for sure, but it was incredible. And the conversations that we had with people afterwards, whether it was about the record, the favorite song, what they thought about the documentary, or even just the pop-up shop experience, you can't get that in the digital realm. You can do limited merch drops in the digital realm. You can put certain things, exclusive viewing of a documentary behind it, but you can't have 150 people at a time that just listened to a band play brand new songs for them acoustically 40 minutes ago, and then now you're in a theater with the same 100 people watching an hour-long behind the scenes about how that record was made and experiencing it the same way, I think, and this is not a support your local movie theater AMC PSA or something, but you really do the group humor, and it's a different way of listening to and engaging with a movie or a documentary when you're listening, and reacting to it as a group.
For sure, yeah.
It was a really cool phenomenon. So that was what we were hoping for, and I think it was even more overwhelming than we had planned for. So
it sounds like both for fans and for you guys, probably a really emotionally kind of reckoning day, which is amazing. I have a follow-up question for you. I mean, like, it sounds like it was an awesome event. So much packed into one day. You mentioned how a lot of the planning for this kind of happened, almost in puzzle pieces, one after another. How soon, I mean, assuming, you guys started recording the documentary, it sounds like from day one of recording the record. At what point was the seed planted in your mind of doing a kind of in-person event around that, and then the rest of this started to build? Was it in the midst of recording? Was it towards the end? I think something that, a lot of musicians experience, myself included, is like when you're wrapped up in the creation process, these other ideas start squeaking their way in, sometimes distracting you, sometimes inspiring you, depending on what day they catch you on. But I'm curious, like, I guess what was the sequence of events of where things kind of started falling into process with building an experience like this? Because it's a process in and of itself.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, we had a bit of an advantage having released, 6+ other albums before, and having tried things and seen what, our fan base enjoyed and what they really appreciated. Right. So that helps a little bit. And we know that we always want to try to do something around, the release week of it. Obviously, in-stores are a thing that, the label loves, and it's a way to touch base with some independent record stores as well, and maybe get some fans that otherwise wouldn't set foot in there anymore to come in and just mill through, the albums, the bins, maybe pick up something else, maybe find a new band, right? Like, which is something I always encourage them, just like, if you're in there, if you're buying something or just looking around, be like, hey, I'm here for this in-store. What other record should I pick up? Like, ask questions, that's how once upon a time, people like us found their favorite band, where it's just like, hey, I really like this record. What else sounds like this? And then, boom, you're off and running.
Yeah, go enjoy the experience of being in a record store while you're in a record store.
Right.
Take advantage of that.
And we always love that as people that have found and come across so much music because of, the proximity to other bands that we like, right? So that's a way for it's not necessarily about us. It is about, we know that we like doing in-stores for that exact reason. So we knew that was probably going to be a part of the release weekend early on, but obviously the label will help us sew that together and see what kind of availability those stores have. And luckily, we had, because we're very Philly based, we can do, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Boston, and New York pretty easily. Like, in a weekend, they're all very drivable. So we knew that was a part of it, but we also knew that the Philadelphia regional in-store thing was going to be on a Saturday. I guess I'll backtrack a little bit too and say we actually started filming portions of this, of like behind the scenes footage, long before we even got in the studio, mind you. This was like filming the writing, which is something we had not really done before, and why I think this was an extra special thing. And, I think the pieces started coming together, and we started realizing what we had when we realized, okay, well, we've had, a camera in the room pretty much at every checkpoint. Like, this is really has the ability of telling a sequential story more than just, here's a cool clip here. Let's pull that, little 30-second clip there. And the story of how the record came together was really special for us too. So, that was kind of the impetus. Probably, by the time we were going out to LA to actually do the majority of the record with Steve, and we said we're flying members of that, of Catalog Co. out to be there in the studio, the whole time effectively, that we were out there. I think that's when we started being like, this is what we're doing. We know and can see what we're going to try to put together there. And then we were like, well, what are we going to do with it? Are we just going to put it up?
Right.
Which then, how can we be strategic about it, but also how can we have it make the biggest possible impact and really feel special? And then we said, well, we are a band that, I mean, if you've listened to the record, there's songs on there that will tell you we are very much from Philadelphia. It's actually 4 of the songs on there were, written with the initial intention of putting a Philadelphia-centric EP together before the record.
Oh, wow.
And they were just so good that they were like, man, we just don't want them to get lost as this like other small project. And those are actually the songs that we did with Will because we wanted to do them in Philadelphia and do them with somebody from Philly. And Will is very, very Philadelphia based in terms of the production community in our world. I think we knew that all of those pieces were coming together. And I think some of those ideas were there, and in the implementation of a lot of the other small pieces, whether it was the special collaborative like Haze Goes On Forever beer, or pulling together the pieces of solidifying the logistics around, how the sessions would work and then the merch. A lot of that stuff actually comes like not 11th hour, but it's surprisingly, no matter how, and this is a cautionary understanding too. I think a lot of bands out there are like, man, we gotta have everything sorted out so soon. We've been doing this for 18 years and we're still like the week before, there's a wrench in the gears and we're like, the merch isn't going to be done. We got to pivot. What can we do?
That definitely that points so well to the importance of being able to pivot and be agile in what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think the pop-up shop, was a really perfect example of this too for us, because you get into the space that morning and you're like at 4, we're opening doors. Something has to happen, right? We have a bunch of these items. We have a general plan of how we can lay this all out, but you have to create a store in 3 hours, and it's all hands on deck. And there's problems where like, how do we hang this? There's not enough space over here. This clothing rack isn't going to work for what we thought it, you know what I mean? All of those things, it's just an onslaught of quick problem solving and being like, all right, well, for whatever that, what's plan B? What's plan C?
Right,
okay. What are we doing? We got to make something happen. And I think that's something, maybe above all else, that as a band, we've grown more and more accustomed to dealing with, right? It doesn't matter how hard you try to control everything. There's always going to be something that comes down to it. I mean, I won't go into it, but you can try and have like a very successful pre-order, and then half of the albums that you sell don't get counted towards first week scans. I don't know. Maybe that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And then that changes everything. So
there's a really interesting corollary here, I think, too. And this is probably something that doesn't get talked about in music circles too much, is like, there's an interesting connection here to what brick and mortar businesses in general have to deal with when you try to do something like this, especially in a suburban town like Doylestown. Like, there are logistical issues with traffic, and it might be raining on the day of the event, and these are all things that businesses that operate on a street, they think about and deal with and pivot around all day long, every day of the year. That's so interesting.
I'll give you a perfect example of that, Jack. Actually, what you don't necessarily think about when you say, cool, we're going to do 4 separate in-store sessions, each with around 150 people. Each one of those people are then promised a signed copy of the album. Then you don't think about the logistics of where are we going to get the band day of a space that they can sign like 700 LPs. Have you ever seen how much space 700 LPs take up? We have pictures of it, like, on my Instagram from it. And it was like, you have to take a methodical approach to sign it. We went in teams of 2s because the other 4 of us at any given time were running the pop-up shop. We're like, putting together the pop-up shop that morning. And we said, okay, we can't just all do it as one. So 2 at a time we'll go over, and they have to assembly line it. And I will say, myself and Josh, if we didn't have to then rebox up the records with the help of some of the people at Siren, I think we would have had record time on that at about like 35 minutes for, signing 700 LPs. But you have to, like, even that, you're just like, oh, we did this wrong, or, like we, have to think through those kind of challenges because there's only so much time in the day. And then it really takes having other people and communicating with other people like the staff at Siren that were willing to take on those challenges and willing to find space for that many records, and get the wristbands, the in and out, the logistics of everybody, informing people, here's how this is going to work, right? Because that's a serious amount of turnover to keep things running and keep things on schedule. They're not a venue, they don't do that every day. And it comes down to a lot of that you got to pull in people that you can trust that are up for the challenge and that are also there to just make things work and figure it out, right? And it's a lot of that problem solving. It's a lot of that MacGyvering. It's, the proverbial duct tape of, okay, well, if that's not going to work here, can you do this? Okay, great. Let's just do that. And then hope that it doesn't feel too much like that when we're ready to just kind of go on stage and have a good time and play. So shout out to them and credit to them. It was definitely a huge undertaking from a brick and mortar record store process. Also, I think in one day we are now, this is an insane thing to think about, having grown up and having gone to that record store, for so many years and knowing what it means to that suburb and that town. We are now the highest selling vinyl LP at Siren Records of all time.
That's wild.
in one fell swoop, which is pretty crazy. And I think that doesn't happen if they're not willing to also, do all hands on deck, right? And everybody that makes it happen. So it's not just us. It's there's so many other people that we have to lean on to kind of do that. I mean, even day of, we're standing there in a pop-up shop and we're like, we need more hangers. Who's out there? You know what I mean? It's like, our manager's assistant, we're making calls and being like, where are you at? Okay, stop at the Target. It's not, sometimes I think it really is just start the ball rolling and then just figure it out as you go. And we've gotten better at it, but it's, there's always going to be something, right? And so with the brick and mortar stuff, especially, they, I think, especially now are really invested in trying to make events like this happen because sure, it brings more people back into the store and reinvigorates that kind of appreciation for vinyl and finding new bands and digging through crates,
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting. Like it sounds to me like the process of this for you guys went a lot like we were inspired by what we were choosing to create in the moment. Like you were documenting what you were doing. And then it was like, well, we know we want to turn this into a documentary. And so what are we going to do with that? And then that begged the next question of like, oh, well, how's that going to fit around the in-stores that we know we're going to do anyway? Oh, well, these things could be paired together. And it just kind of fell logistically like one thing after another like that. And then was it just a matter of, as far as I imagine the merch was planned out like, a few months in advance just to make sure you could get your inventory. But like working through costs like that and then being agile and like in the month or so leading up, it was just like, okay, we've got what we want it to look like. Now let's see how this timeline changes like a Jell-O mold.
Yeah. The production of merchandise items like that is obviously really hairy depending on what time. Summer's really hectic. That's actually one of the biggest logistical hurdles just in general is working with, whether you're working with a merchandise company or, an independent print house, whatever it might be, staying on top of those things and realizing it's always going to take longer than you think it's going to. And even when you do, what's going to happen is you're going to have it, oh, this line looks incredible. This is going to be awesome. And they're going to be like, listen, they're out of that Carhartt blank that you want. They don't have it anymore. And you're like, oh, no, so or it's going to be something and you're going to have to pivot. You're going to be like, okay, what blanks can we get that look cool, that are also have an exclusive feel to them that work with the artwork? Because we now have the design. So we got to put it on a color and a thing that we think works. Right. And we've been doing that for years. And our singer, Dan, is really, really intensely in love with figuring all of that stuff out and poking through some of that stuff. Luckily, he'll sit down with Tony, who's been with us for a while, who does a lot of our merch management and sales on tours and help figure out logistics as well. So there's hands in all of that. And even so, sometimes it's still like, hey, we got to wait 3 extra hours because they're not done because the blanks came in late, you know? And that stuff, you hear it literally every day, and it doesn't matter how hard you try, right? So, but the point is you get it there, and again, malleability, you're willing to be flexible, and you shoot for the stars, maybe you'll land on the moon, that kind of thing, right? That old chestnut. So it is tough, but although I will say, because there's so many hands, whether it be from getting art done, conceptualizing some of the designs or art, because sometimes artists are like, what do you want me to go? And it might be something as, we want something that coincides with this lyric from the record. You know, we want something that feels that fits the space of this kind of aesthetic, but you know, we love your style specifically, so run with that. And everywhere in between, and trying to put something together that feels like it's cohesive, that there's some designs for everybody, but understanding that also it's not always, I mean, this is a big thing too, actually, and I'm sure you've talked about it a lot on the show. Sometimes you have to pull your own personal taste back just a touch.
Oh yeah.
Especially when you're creating merchandise, because you're realizing like, hey, there's a lot of crossover. And if you like it, yes, there's a chance that there's a number of other people that, you know, listen to your band will also probably dig it, but not always. So it does help to keep that kind of objectivity and say, hey, what have our fans seemed to respond to before? What's trending now, right? Like what's very in right now, right? The Carhartt stuff, very in right now. So we were like, we know we want to do that quality thing because our fans and the people that are coming to this don't want to just, you know, buy some old hoodie, and we don't want that. We want, you know, something that they're going to live in because it's so comfortable and so great, and they love the design, right? So that's also always been very important to us. We learned, you know, you can't, you know, cheap out early on because you want something that people are going to value, and that's an extension of your brand overall as a band, as an artist, you know, that you care about that. It's something you would wear. Anything that we're putting out are things that maybe if it's not my personal taste and my favorite, like I might have a different favorite merch item or design than somebody else in the band, but that's kind of the point, right?
Right.
You know, we want it to be of a quality and feel like it's all something that we're really proud of, that we can stand behind at the end of the day, and then put it into a form like a pop-up shop that feels like a bit more of an experience, so you can see all of those designs together in a cool kind of walk-through space. You know, that's also fun for us.
I'm curious what the reaction from the fans was like as you guys were kind of seeing this all go down, because it was such a big event. You know, with all these different moving pieces. I would be curious, just like as a fly on the wall, what were the reactions like?
A lot of smiles, honestly. And it's really cool. It was interesting, like the way the space was laid out. There was like a little room where we kept like bags and everything that kind of acted like a green room, because Siren doesn't have, you know, anywhere to really keep stuff or whatever. It's, you know, it's the records and the counter, and that's it. So that was a place for us to hang in like a home base, but there was also, you could kind of look out over the store, and we were trying to keep like a certain, like a 1 in, 1 out for capacity reasons. But I mean, dude, there was a line around the block that stretched past the entrance to Siren Records before the shop even opened, which is pretty crazy in itself to see. We've seen lines for shows. We've all been in a nice queue waiting for a show, but for something that was just a precursor event to the in-stores and the show, that, you know, to have a line like that is really neat as well. And I think you see that in other industries, especially in the fashion industry. You'll see a lot of brands do like some pop-up collaborative events, you know, some limited run stuff. Sure. You'll see like sneakerheads know all about this.
Gaming. Yeah.
And so it's also a good thing that we love to borrow from other things. And I know y'all talk about this on the show a lot as well, you know, borrow from other industries, right? As creatives, it doesn't have to be just what you've seen bands in this world do before that has worked. It can be, what are, you know, photographers doing over here creatively that you can kind of apply to create a unique experience or a unique moment for people? What are illustrators doing? What are clothing designers doing, right? And I love that. And that's been fun for us too, because as a band that's been around for as long as we have, you make a lot of merchandise designs, and you go through a lot of those conversations, and you almost become, I mean, we joke, it's like, you know, a traveling merch vending, you know, enterprise as well, that kind of follows the band and helps support us and helps make us, the whole idea is it helps us continue to make space to hopefully make great art and write great songs, because that takes so much time and effort, obviously. But borrowing from other creative industries is a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I love that, man. I couldn't agree more. Actually, that's a really great point, and something that I wanted to bring up was, and why I was so excited to talk about this today, is I think there's something that artists and musicians and bands, kind of across all spectrums, from people who are just starting out to artists that have been in the game for years and years and years, can learn from what we're talking about today and learn from what you guys did. And I think that what you mentioned about borrowing from creative industries, other industries, any kind of industry, really. I mean, you even see this with general, brick and mortar at like Black Friday, the lines that wrap around and the experiences that some stores create on those sorts of retail holidays. Anyway, what I mean to say is you can look at other industries and you can find something that fits what you're able to do with the audience size that you have. For a smaller band that's just getting started, for you, that could maybe just look like hosting a listening party, out back at a coffee shop for 4 or 5 fans. If that's where you are, you could do something cool like that. Or for an artist or a band more like you guys, or even, beyond, the sky's kind of the limit to the creativity.
Right. And I totally agree. And thinking about the scale, and yes, because we understand that we have a pretty vast history as a band. So we've developed some pretty deep relationships, with people, and people have developed some deep relationships with our band and our music and the catalog, right? So that affords us to do some other things, that might be a little bit more difficult and or cost prohibitive to do for a band that doesn't have that same history yet, right? So I think that's a good thing. But taking the approach where you look at what you're doing or trying to do as a band, and what people that are already engaging a little bit with what you've done seem to be interested in, or even, and I know you've alluded to this plenty of times, sometimes polling the people that are responding and engaging and asking them what they'd be interested in. Don't be afraid to do that. I mean, we just literally, as we talk about this, we, just offered up hey, anybody that's bought some piece of merch from us at any point, would y'all be interested in, kind of taking a survey, because we want to be able to make better stuff for you and serve you better if you're coming to shows and are someone that looks forward to, to grabbing something, right?
Having that kind of data for an event like this is probably so helpful.
And that also makes it, because we have a wealth of data, even on size breakdown stuff. So we can make more accurate predictions on things like that. And which is something that with a lot of the artists that I coach, when it comes to touring or playing shows, I'm just like, dude, you don't think it matters, but even if you play a show and sell like 10 things somewhere, keep that in a spreadsheet somewhere, because every time you go back to that city, you'll add to that. And before you know it, be like, this is our like small, medium, large, XL, yada, yada breakdown. And that can help you gauge what an initial merch order should look like up front and predict some of these things, which will ultimately help you function as a much more well-oiled business when it gets to that point where you're trying to solely support yourself and your career based off of touring and based off of all of those things that you're asking people to support you with. And that kind of predictive data is really powerful. And obviously, a band that's been around for 2 decades has a lot more of that, but also people change, demographics change, sizes change. I think a lot of people's sizes may have, changed. I'm taking a little bit more loose fit approach post pandemic, full disclosure, but I think that's okay. So things like that are going to shift and slide, of course, but that is a huge, huge point, I think. And it goes back to saying, hey, fashion is also made up of trends, right? If you look at now, music is always very cyclical, I tend to think. And I think you see a lot of things coming back now, especially in the punk and pop punk driven space, interestingly enough, is having a resurgence and revival, whether it's Avril putting out a record for the first time in a while, or, a lot of the bands that are under this like kind of Travis Barker umbrella.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a 90s resurgence going on right now.
Right. And that's exactly where I was going. And as a product of the 90s. I don't hate that at all.
No, I'm enjoying every second of it.
Right, right. I wish I had kept some of my like Lee pipes around from back in the day when I was a kid, but I'll just have to go buy another pair, I guess.
Yeah, breaking out the Dickies.
Right, right, right. So in that way, you got to kind of watch things on the side as well. And what you're doing is you're investing and engaging with other industries and other cultural moments. And that's, I think, also, you talk about trying to be engaged in a greater conversation which is what you're trying to do, hopefully, with, fans or people that are willing to stop and offer some attention to your music and what you're doing as a band. Paying attention to other things and just living your life and being a part of those things can also help you better connect with people like that. And, style trends is just one example of that, especially if you're a band that exists in a genre where merchandise is very popular a lot. Like people like band tees. I love band tees. I've had more and then had to make patches out of them and then donate them to Goodwill because they don't fit more of those than I could ever care to imagine from bands that I love that nobody knows about except 5 people in that town from 20 years ago. But, it's a way of participating in that. And we've watched huge, whether it's if you look at how things will shift on the Hot Topic wall of all those designs, right? And we've worked with a bunch of people that pretty much have curated that entire wall for years from an artistic standpoint. And even they know, the foil print, not in anymore. Things like that, they will tend to shift and borrow some other things from other fashion brands, that are making headway. So I think that's really, really important just to keep an eye out, not just narrow tunnel vision in your sector, but what might be relevant and interesting. And also I'll say that the things that you like outside of music are also, those tastes are ways to show and share more about yourself to people and to your fans, which I think is such a thing that is often missed because a lot of it is, how do I get someone to pay attention to the music? How do I get someone to listen to this song? And even if you do that, right, there has to be a little bit more there that keeps you top of mind. And, even if it's something as simple as, Jack's in that band, he's the sneakerhead. That's the band with the singers super into all the limited edition dunk stuff, right? Maybe that's enough and that's a reason to be I'll follow along because he's always posting cool stuff about that as well. And I really like that. And thinking about what you like, even if it's, I don't know, maybe everybody has a unique history, unique hobbies, and even if you think it's weird and random, maybe that's actually better. If you're I don't know, I collect bugs. Nobody wants that. Somebody out there really wants someone that makes the music that you do and collects bugs. And it's just a matter of figuring it out and finding those people. But when you find that person is going to you're going to be their favorite artist. And I think that's more important a lot of times than trying to cast a very wide, general, bland net,
I think you raise a really good point there about, and I think this gets lost often, right? When we're making music, it suddenly becomes about how can I get somebody to engage with this piece of art that I've been creating? And that becomes the prime thing that we're trying to get fans to do. And it's really easy to get into that trap. That's not a problem. Of course you want people to engage with the art, but we forget that the reason that we love music is that it became a piece of who we are and how we exist, and everything else in your life goes along with that. So you have to, I think as artists, we have to remember that the way people consume what we make is in context with everything else going on with them. So if you can pour that same sense into everything else that you're doing with your brand, you just become more authentic, not less authentic.
Absolutely. It's very well said, Jack. Yeah. I think so much of the artists that become your favorites are tied to so much more than just the songs themselves. It's the time, the place, the memories, the nostalgia that they dredge up for you, and even the people that you first consumed them with. Those shows, those even live shows are an experience. It's a congregation of people that for that couple hours, that at the very least everybody in that room loves the band on stage, and there's one, at least one element, probably many elements of commonality amongst you. And that sense of community is something, that is really powerful. Even if it's not top of mind when you're there, you feel it when you feel an entire room full of a couple thousand people chanting back the words to Sweetness or something, because I'm a huge Jimmy Eat World fan, right? Like, and I think that is the same thing that you start to get in smaller doses, especially if you're trying to create that or trying to get at that really powerful essence in the digital realm, to set the stage for a powerful enough relationship to get someone to come be a part of that in-person event. Those are the kind of moments that you can connect with, right? And I think shifting the conversation sometimes, away from just here's my music, here's my music, here's my music. This is actually an interesting conversation that I have with a lot of bands about cover songs, right? Sure. From like an industry standpoint, there's plenty of, people that will be like, cover songs are a great way to get noticed, like put them up on YouTube and, maybe one will go viral. The problem with that mentality is that I think there's a way stronger method for approaching that. And I think the mindset should be, what song can you pick that tells the people that are going to listen to it and the people that are already listening to your music more about you, right? So for me, it would be like an Everclear song, because I love the 90s, and So Much for the Afterglow was one of my favorite records in the 90s. And even if that's not going to go viral now, like, I'd rather do that because it means a lot to me. And there's going to be a small sect of people being like, dude, that song was the best song on that record, and nobody wants to admit it, and it starts to raise a more interesting conversation, I think. And that's just my opinion. There's obviously plenty of people that have gone extremely viral and built followings on a lot of platforms based on just looking at what's in the top 10 that day in pop or rock and doing a cover of it. And that's fine. But if you're going to do that, I'd say at least pick something that you do have a genuine attachment to, that you do have some sort of story behind why you chose that song, and what you wanted to do with it and how you wanted to put your spin on it. Because that's actually, I think, going to help make that project way more powerful for you than just trying to, live in that cover world and seeing which one sticks. It turns into a piece of like, I did this and now everybody knows that Casey covered this song because that's one of his favorite bands and that was the first record he ever got, and he went and saw this show that, what I mean? There's a story behind that, and I think speaking in stories like that helps further whatever you're trying to do and forge that kind of connection a lot deeper.
I think that's a really good bridge between a lot of what we've been talking about in-person events and curating and trying to create experiences. It's an interesting bridge because that same sort of storytelling kind of weaving that you guys did, both in, documenting what you were doing from day one of the record to creating this event, both from that side and also from just actually, creating the, step-by-step of the day. There was a story and kind of an overarching kind of narrative going on, or a consciousness, even if you want to call it that, like a collective consciousness that you guys were kind of creating with your people. That same principle, exactly what you were saying, it can be applied really intentionally to what you choose to create online, and not to create head trash for people and be like, you got to think really hard about every piece of content. Like, you don't have to be precious about everything, but that's a really good point about cover music that I agree with 100%, how it can be so useful from the sense of engaging the people that are already in your world. Like, pick and choose, don't just make it about like, oh, Meghan Trainor just put out a new song and it's like blowing up on the radio. I need to race to cover that like every other YouTuber in the world. You're probably better off not doing that unless that song really, really speaks to you.
Right. And it totally can. And that's totally okay. Right. In no way saying that there isn't a lane for that to cross over of like what's really popular right now. If it's a Harry Styles song and here's why I live and die by Harry Styles catalog and this song specifically, and why it hit me at this, triangulated moment in my life, then run with that, then do it 100% and try and get as much out of that and as much mileage as you can, but use all those different activities to tell your bigger story, right? Because that's effectively what you're doing with each post, each song you write, each little piece of content, each decision you choose to make as a band and as a creative. You're writing your entire story. So I love thinking about, and it's ironic now because I don't think we had a lot of these, thoughts 17 years ago when we were starting the band, because we were in a very different place and taking it from a much more lighthearted perspective, admittedly. But start thinking about how each one of those things plays into telling your overall story, right? In the digital marketing world, the phrase evergreen content is a very popular one, right? Something that can live there and, be stumbled upon for future generations or future, searches that will let people know something about what you do, something about what your product is, something, in whatever case. And for a band, I start to say, don't look at it as just trying to grab at a real quick viral moment. See if you can try to mash all of those goals into one by saying, hey, this is something that even if it doesn't get a ton of streams or views right now, will still tell a little something about me, about my personality, about what I care about. And I think that's an important piece to share for somebody that comes along. Let's say it's like Instagram, right? Even if 5 people view that video, there might be a 6th person 6 months from now that goes scrolling through your feed and finds that video and is like, oh, whoa.
Yep. Yeah.
He loves Everclear. Wow, I didn't think anybody loved them as much as I did. That's mind blowing, right? Just circling back to that. And I think that is a way better guiding strategy if you can do it. And don't overthink it, because sometimes you're doing a lot of these things inherently by just being yourself and putting out pieces of yourself online, right? And that's also gets into the larger conversation about experimental marketing and seeing hey, let me put this part of my voice or artistic prowess out, and let me see how people react to that. Oh, interesting. I didn't expect that type of person or, people in that community would actually be into that, but I guess they are. Interesting. Or really thought that one was going to stick. Really fell flat, just crickets. At least and can kind of move on from there.
It's really exciting for me to follow you guys and see these experimental marketing kind of tent poles happening over the years. So I'm curious to see what lessons learned you guys will have from release weekend in Doylestown and how that will be applied, 3 years down the line to the next thing that you guys do. I'm curious. I mean, there's a few big sort of ideas that come to my mind right off the top about this, but I'm curious to see what you think. I mean, for one, what's really cool is it didn't sound like you guys were all that concerned with scalability. This is a concern that I hear a lot from artists when we talk about, putting together in-person kind of events or, pairing, an experience, an actual physical experience with a release. It's always well, that's not sustainable or that's not scalable. I don't know how we could do that. It sounds like you guys weren't all that concerned with it. And a lot of it was not fly by the seat of your pants by any stretch, but it sounded like the willingness to pivot was a huge thing. And also you figured out logistics. You thought about the audience that this offer was going to be right for, and you figured out the timeline. And then from there, the rest was okay, now it will fall into place as it does. I'm curious though, for artists like you guys, like your band, and also people that are earlier on in their journey, what recommendations and any big pieces of advice do you think you would give when it comes to starting to undertake something to the effect of what you guys did? Maybe not at the same scale, at any scale, really.
I think, one, always be learning and always be listening. I think listening to anybody that does come in and offer their time and attention or feedback, even if that's in a lack of action, right? Listen to that and know, okay, at the very least, don't just go after and curate everything about yourself just to, based on trying to grow. You also want to be authentic. You've got to find the cross section of how that's possible, because otherwise it's not sustainable. And I think that's the first lesson that we've learned is there are things about our band that we know in no way would conventionally on paper be looked at as glamorous or really, easily marketable, right? But a lot of those, have become little bits of charm and peeks behind the curtain where I think the people that listen to our music have come to appreciate that fact that we don't try to over curate and over dress up some of the things like that, right? And that's a powerful thing as well. Is I think a lot of younger bands, it's very easy to get wrapped up in trying to make something look perfect, look quote unquote professional, right? I think it's very easy to lose sight of an honesty in who you are and what you are when you try to make something that, is tailored for an algorithm, is tailored to make you look like a rock star, right? It's an interesting thing where I think there's a balance of it. And sure, like everybody in a band loves to post a really cool looking photo of themselves in the midst of the production at a live show, right? That's fun. That's its own, way of art and way of sharing an experience and a snapshot of a live moment, for sure. But then I think it's just as interesting for people to get a peek at what it's like for that same person to write a song with their dog on their lap, to, and not every, and it's finding that balance of what you're willing to share. And because you don't have to, like, you shouldn't be forced to overshare. And social media anxiety is a conversation I can come back. We can do a whole episode series on that probably, but it's about finding that balance as a young artist and walking forward and testing the waters on certain things and saying, hey, do I feel bold enough to maybe take this step here? And what happens if I do? Do I feel bold enough to maybe try and push my boundaries over here a little bit and see what happens? Okay, let me pull back. I don't think that was for me, right? And that's okay too, because you're not going to learn all of those lessons and figure out what works for you until you try those things. And I think a lot of bands are like, nope, every post, everything, it has to be perfectly curated. We got to nail it the first time. Let me tell you, after 18 years, we did not nail it the first time, the first swing at everything, 100%. You know what I mean?
That's why, one, you need a lot of at-bats. And two, I think you're so right in saying that, like, a lot of artists and bands, when they strive for that perfect, knocking it out of the park first swing, that's where they often miss.
Right. They actually scrub every essence of themselves out of the picture and out of the story by doing that. And so I think that's definitely, be careful about that. Number one, I think honest and authentic is always going to win over like high quality, professional, like overproduced stuff, right? It just is. I mean, you guys, you run a ton of ads and you see this every day, right? Like, Jack, you tell me, of all of the stuff you run, you've definitely had some interesting case studies where like the least pro video clip that you used to run a campaign was actually the one that probably performed the best, right? I'm sure there's plenty of case studies like that.
Oh yeah, in most cases, actually.
And there's a reason, because people know inherently when they're being sold something, right? And a lot of people are like, I don't need anything. Why stop trying to sell something to me? So if there's another way for it to come into their lives in a more honest, approachable way. And sometimes that way might not be through music, right? Sometimes that might be somebody showing up in another circle because they did a podcast on cooking, because that's one of their hobbies, right? And this is a thing too, where when it comes down to press, like our singer and a couple of the guys in our band, very big Eagles fans, right? Like they're big sports fans, right? So they're actually like, when it comes time to, to do interviews and do press on a cycle, the interviews that they want to do most are like, yo, can I do this podcast on the Eagles? I really just want to talk about what our chances look like this season. You know what I mean? Like, and that's and then you see those are the things where, especially in Philly, clearly, but in other walks, like many of us, a bunch of us are really into, obviously, like recording. I do a lot of production stuff. So if there's an opportunity for me to do, a podcast or do an interview that's very like with guitar.com or gear centric, that's great. And that's awesome. And there might be some people that are like, I never heard of your band, but honestly, this story about this Sun concert lead blowing up in the studio was pretty funny. And I checked out the record. It's actually pretty cool.
I like you. You're coming into my circle, and yeah, the story you just told, I like you. I'm going to listen to you.
Right. And I think a lot of that, it's people and it's stories. Most of it is just that simple. And if you start to overcomplicate it and start to dress it up or look at it like, you write a first draft of something and you have someone come in that edits out every other word, you're left with a very bad story. You know what I mean? That has no tone of you, right? It's just anybody could have written this, and that's not what you want, I think. So that would be one of the cautionary things I would tell a lot of younger bands to look out for. And I think some of them, this era that especially like Gen Z and a lot of younger musicians are coming up in, they know because they see and they feel what works, what doesn't, what trends. They know it's very be in the moment and just put it out there. And I think there's both good and bad to that mindset. I think there's a time and a place to try to refine something and curate and pull the best parts of something out and create a story that is that much more magnificent out of those pieces. And then there's times to give little one-liners, right? In the same way, it's just like, here's this joke that says a lot about you, that's your favorite joke, but you didn't think too much about it, and striking a balance between all those. That would be some of the things that, across many years, I think has helped us forge the maybe the respect that we've garnered from a community that's very kind, very empathetic and supportive, and shares a lot of the same values that we do, which we're really lucky because you can't always pick your fans.
Yeah, what more can you ask for in a fan base? That's amazing. That's so cool, man. Well, I think that's great advice, and thank you so much for diving into all of this with me. Like I said, I really think it's a topic that artists are interested in, but they're just afraid to approach it. And getting to talk about this both from the logistical standpoint to the connections and the scalability and the sustainability kind of across all the spectrum here was way too much fun for me. So thank you. It was so much fun to dive into.
Of course. Happy to do it. Always happy to come back. Who knows what the future holds, but down the line, I'll be listening to the show, as we'll be texting back and forth. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, they know where to find me. They can hit me up. And these are the conversations that I really like having these days outside of Wonder Years stuff, because it's what brings a lot of joy into both continuing the journey with that band and making what we make and trying to have a really positive impact, but also trying to help other bands and other musicians that are trying to forge their own narrative and their own story and do their own bit of good and create their own communities, which is really cool. So anytime I can help someone that has that at mind and has a good heart and good head on their shoulders, it's almost equally as fulfilling as anything Wonder Years related. So thanks for letting me come on and chop it up with you, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I'll make sure to I'll link to your Instagram in the show notes so that if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can. Also, make sure you guys check out The Hum Goes On Forever. Go see what the Wonder Years are up to on the road. And catch up with Casey on his podcast as well, The Record Process. We'll link to that in the show notes too. But thank you again so much for being here, dude. And Indies, I hope you guys take some of these lessons and maybe think about doing something experiential and cool and different for your next release. I think we covered so much ground here today that hopefully gives you guys some creative fuel to work with.
Absolutely. Ed, I hope I did you proud, buddy.
We'll see you guys next time with Ed on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies.
Really